Okay, hi Mom. This is Stephanie Rushton Partridge recording M. Jill Baronda Rushton, which is my mother. Today is the 6th of May, 2021, and we are sitting in my house in Gilbert, Arizona. My mom is here visiting from Rio Rancho, New Mexico. So, Mom, first state your birthday.
October 8, 1946.
Okay, where were you born?
Turlock, Stanislaus County, California.
Okay. How long did you live there?
I think I was 7. Well, I lived there for 2 years, and then my parents went to Tacoma, Washington for a year or two. So I went there and then came back, and I was in Turlock until I was 6 or 7. And then I moved to Santa Rosa, California, where I was until 7th grade.
Okay. So what were you doing, or what were your parents doing in California? Do you have any memories of that?
Well, my dad was in the Army, but both my parents were born in California, so it just made sense that we'd be there.
Was your mom working when you were little?
I think she always worked. I think she always had to, because my dad was an alcoholic, and she couldn't depend on his income.
Okay. So you eventually moved to Tacoma, Washington when you were older.
Yeah, that wasn't until 9th grade.
Okay. And then you went to high school there too, didn't you? Or junior high?
I did. I went to a year. Well, I moved a lot. We lived in Santa Rosa till 7th grade, and my dad was still in the Army. He was stationed in Hanau, Germany, and so we went there, supposed to be there for 3 years, but we moved back in about a year and a half, I think, because my dad got in trouble. He went AWOL, and they put him in jail, and I didn't even know that.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
I didn't know that because the problem with alcoholism is that parents always keep secrets. Somehow they think kids won't know. And I didn't learn that my dad was in jail until I was an adult.
Oh, okay.
My mom just said, "Oh, he's stationed in Alaska. He can't come home for a couple of years," and I didn't question it.
So I didn't realize that you lived in Germany. I knew that you were an exchange student there when you were older.
That was later.
Okay.
But when we lived there and I was in junior high, it was a whole different thing, because we lived on a military base. I was only around people who spoke English, and it wasn't like I was living in Germany.
Right. You were just on base.
We bought everything on base.
Yeah. Had school there and everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going through your history first, because I figured that was a good place to start.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories of your home in Tacoma when you lived there? Or do you remember your address or your street or anything?
Okay. We're talking about 2 different times.
Okay.
When I was a little girl, I have one memory of living in Tacoma at 2 or 3, which is crazy. Because in Santa Rosa, where we lived, or Turlock, we literally never had snow. It just wasn't possible. And I have this little girl memory of being outside in the snow and being hit in the face with a snowball and running in the house screaming. And that's the only thing I remember of my early early childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that year or two in Tacoma, I said we moved back to Turlock, but it really wasn't we moved back to Turlock.
Mm-hmm.
It was just me. I lived with my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother and sister moved back east. And I was young. I'm still not sure if it was North Carolina or South Carolina, but they lived there over a year.
So why didn't you go with them, do you know?
They couldn't afford it.
Hmm.
He had been demoted
Mm-hmm.
in rank because he kept getting drunk.
Yeah.
And my mother took my sister because she was 5 years older.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother figured, she's little, she'll be fine, I'll leave her here.
Yeah.
But it damaged me
Mm-hmm.
because I had been left.
Right.
And that long ago, long distance phone calls were extremely expensive.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I ever even spoke to my mother
Mm-hmm.
for the whole time that they were gone.
Hmm.
And I wish I'd had a picture.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking, I wish I had a picture of my mother, because I didn't remember what she looked like at that age.
And you were about 6, you think? About 5 or 6?
Five
Wow.
and 6.
Okay.
And when they came back, my grandmother said, "Oh, your mother's here, your sister's here." But really, I didn't know until I heard my mother laugh,
Mm-hmm.
and that clicked on the memory
Mm-hmm.
of that laugh.
Hmm.
And that's how I knew it was her.
Wow. And
Yeah.
so you stayed with your mom's mom, so that was Nada.
Mm-hmm.
What's her real name?
Loretta
Reynolds.
Reynolds. Griffith is the name she was married with,
Okay.
but her first husband was Schofield, Frank Schofield, and when he died, eventually she remarried Charlie Pesterfield,
Oh, okay.
who was a farmer in Turlock, and they never really got along.
Oh, okay.
And
now, I know that she has the nickname Nada. Why does she have the nickname Nada?
I don't know. My sister started calling her that before I could talk, so I can't.
Okay. Now, we're going to come back to Nada, but first, let's go back to your mom came back to Turlock and picked you up, and then
we moved to Santa Rosa.
Do you have any memories in Santa Rosa?
Well, I have a lot of memories. Santa Rosa is where, I have to look this up. I don't know if it's my great-grandmother or great-great-grandmother, but I remember going to her 90th birthday. She lived in Santa Rosa in a little tiny house that just smelled like an old person who never opened the door. And my grandmother lived there. My grandmother basically supported us. My mom always worked, and I think she probably paid for the food, but it was my grandmother who bought the house in Santa Rosa.
Your grandmother Nada?
Yes.
Okay.
And when we eventually moved to Tacoma, my grandmother bought a house there, which we moved into eventually.
Oh, okay.
My parents lived in a house, but I really didn't know anything about finances.
Yeah.
And we lived in a big old house in Tacoma, and now I recognize it wasn't in a good neighborhood, and my parents split up and ended up getting a divorce, and at that point my father disappeared, and my mother and I moved into my grandmother's house. And that was where I finished high school.
Okay.
Was in that house.
And Aunt Terry was gone by this point. Terry.
She lived with us in the big old house in the bad neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But shortly, or while we were there, she went off to different schools. She never really lived with us.
Okay.
Again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so you were living with Grandma Nada in Grandma Nada's house. Did she live with you, or was she still in California?
She was there.
Okay.
She bought it and moved in, and she lived on the bottom floor. It was actually a 3-story house. It was a cool old house. It had a full basement with nothing but a washer and dryer and boxes. And then the bottom floor was the apartment my grandmother lived in. And it just had one really big bedroom.
Okay.
And a living room and a big kitchen and a bathroom. And then upstairs there was more space. I'm trying to think. Maybe there wasn't. Upstairs on the 2nd floor there was a master bedroom and bathroom and a living room and a kitchen and eating area. And my bedroom was on the 3rd floor, which was cool because I had the ceiling that was like this, and it rains all the time in Tacoma.
Yeah.
So I could go to sleep with the sound of rain, and that's really cool. And then I had a big window at one end of the room I could look out. I don't know. I liked it.
That's pretty cool. Did your mom have a good relationship with her mom?
Well, I think so, but I don't remember them ever arguing. But that doesn't mean they didn't.
Right.
Later, my mother said that her mother always made them feel guilty. She was always putting guilt trips on them. And I'm sure that's the way she was raised, considering Nada's background. I get it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go into high school. You decided to go as a foreign exchange student to Germany.
It was, let me give you the time frame.
Okay.
I went to school in Fort Lewis, in the Army base, for a year in 9th grade. 10th grade, we moved to Tacoma, and I went to Stadium High School in 10th grade and 11th grade. But during 11th grade, it turns out I'm good at foreign languages. I can learn languages pretty easily.
Okay.
At least German. And I started taking that in 11th grade, and I found out about the school's exchange programs. They had a lot of exchange students there. It was a big high school for the time. There were more than 1,000 kids there. There were, I think, 600 in my graduating class, which was a big class. And anyway, I got active in the exchange club, and when it came time to choose exchange students, I went through all the process. I had a whole bunch of books I had to read. I had interviews from the principal and the vice principal and a counselor, and there were other kids who interviewed too, but I knew the other two personally. They were friends of mine, and I knew they came from well-to-do families. And I just said, well, if you don't choose me, I won't go.
Mm-hmm.
But the other two will go on their own money, which they did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to go. The program I was on ended up being a Quaker organization. It was American Friends.
Mm-hmm.
And the family that I was placed with had planned a 1-month vacation in Yugoslavia.
Ooh.
Which was a really exotic thing to do. I mean, who even knew about Yugoslavia in the 60s? It was part of the Soviet Union and really a third world country at the time. Anyway, so that family wrote the American Friends Exchange Group and said they were going to Yugoslavia for a month. Could I come with them? So I didn't want to pass that up. But it meant I had to fly from Tacoma, Washington to Germany all by myself. I mean, nobody else.
Yeah.
And I was so nervous. I remember not eating in airports. I was just afraid I'd do something wrong. I was terrified.
Yeah.
The other thing was, and that was in June of 1962. I joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints along with my mother and grandmother. And it was a year later. It was June of 63. And anyway, I got there eventually, and my German family picked me up, and I had had 2 whole years of German, which it turns out are pretty worthless when you go to that country, because everybody speaks so much faster than we ever did in a classroom. So I was really pretty lost. It was the Stamm family, Stamm, and they had a daughter a year older than me whose name was Jutta, and Jutta. And Jutta wasn't going to the same school I went to. The exchange was with the Geschwisterschule in
sister of the school?
No, but you're close.
Geschwister.
Geschwister means siblings.
Oh, Geschwister, okay.
Geschwisterschule is the name of a brother and sister who fought against Hitler. They were underground making leaflets and stuff. They were heroes. But of course they were murdered by the Nazis.
Right.
But they named that school after them. Geschwisterschule was an all-girls school in Solingen, North Rhine-Westphalia. And anyway, so I got there, and I was so worried that I would lose my testimony and I would never find the church. You know, this was a long time ago. And 20 years later, the bishops, or at least the stake presidents, all got these great big books, I mean really big, that had a list of every ward, every branch, every stake and district in the world. But in 1963, that didn't exist. And so nobody in my state could tell me where the nearest ward was. I was lost.
Yeah.
And I prayed so hard. We were only at my family's house in Solingen for less than a week before we went to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And the day before, before we went to Yugoslavia,
Okay.
and the day before we were going to leave, Yuta and I had to walk downtown. They lived in a high-rise building
Mm-hmm.
in the city of Solingen, but the stores were like 3 or 4 blocks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. And we had to walk downtown to get little stuff for our trip.
Mm-hmm.
Yuta needed toothpaste and stuff. So, and it was June, but Germany isn't Arizona or New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
June was cool.
Yeah.
I won't say cold because it wasn't snowing,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think it was 70 degrees.
Okay.
And people had jackets and coats on. Well, Yuta and I were standing on a street corner waiting for the light to turn green, and I looked down and did a double take, and there were 2 guys standing next to us who had rounded toe shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked around, and that was something I noticed, because I
Mm-hmm.
like shoes, I like clothes,
Mm-hmm.
and every male in Germany had pointy-toed shoes.
Hmm.
And these 2 guys had round-toed shoes that I knew were American.
Mm-hmm.
They both had on the same black coats that came down to about their knees. They both had on black suits, and they both had hats on. Now, you wouldn't know this, but in the 60s and earlier,
Mm-hmm.
every missionary in the world had to wear a hat.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
That was a proper guy's outfit,
Hmm.
in England at least.
Right.
And it wasn't unusual for people to wear hats in Germany at that time. Anyway, I moved around the other side of Utah so I could listen to them to see if they were speaking English.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't. They were speaking German. And just then the light changed, and all I could do is turn around to Utah and say, "Un moment bitte." That was the little bit I could say
One
to
moment,
her.
please.
"One moment, please." And I ran up to those 2 guys, and I said, "Are you Mormon missionaries? Are you from the U.S.?" And I wanted so much to give them a hug.
Mm-hmm.
I was so excited, and they were so excited because they weren't around any American girls.
Yep.
And we all just kind of jumped up and down on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told them who I was, what I was doing there. I introduced them to Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to carry these business cards with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they handed me the business card that had the address of the branch
Mm-hmm.
in Solingen. And I was so happy there was a branch there,
Mhm.
although I didn't know what a branch was.
Mm-hmm.
I'd only
You'd only been a member of your.
I'd only lived in wards that had stake centers.
Mhm.
I'd never been anywhere else.
Yeah.
So I went off to Yugoslavia with the Stamm family, but I was so grateful for my answered prayers that I found the church. And it was the start of a long life of recognizing that the Lord hears and answers your prayers. And I knew He had mine. There was no other way. I would have found the church. I'm just sure of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't know the name in German. And I didn't know anybody who could tell me the name in German. So anyway, We went off to Yugoslavia, and it really was a third world country. Things were not clean like they were in Germany, and it was a communist country, so all the food was rationed. And we were in this huge trailer park. The Stamms owned this little trailer that you pull behind a car, and they would sleep in the trailer at night. And Yuta and I, they had like a tent that came off the side. We'd sleep in there. Well, we were there maybe a week, and Mrs. Stamm had to get up at 6 o'clock and get in line every day to get food for that day.
Oh, wow.
And it was a communist country.
Yeah.
And they would run out. They'd run out of milk, they'd run out of meat, they'd run out of anything by the time she would get to the front of the line. And, you know, that gets old really fast. And so we just packed it all up and drove to a trailer park that was by Venice in Italy, which was pretty darn cool. Although these trailer parks at the time had hundreds of trailers and tents from people all over Europe. So it wasn't a small thing. I mean, there were, I don't know how many, but there were hundreds. And we went to Venice one whole day, and I fell in love with Venice. To this day, in my head, Venice is the most romantic place in the world. And I just loved it.
I had never heard that story before, and I did not know you've been to Venice before.
I don't think anybody else in the family has ever heard it. Anyway, so we had a nice time, but if you know me now, you know I'm just not a person who can lay on a beach all day. I just can't sit still like that. But I did read a lot of the Book of Mormon while I was there. And I read more there than I had in Tacoma. So that was a good thing. I don't know, Yuta and I just walked around.
And then when you got back from that, you had the contact information for the missionaries.
I did, and they dropped me off there.
They dropped you off at the church?
No, let me think about that. No, they told me which buses to catch.
Oh, the Stamms did. Yeah.
Yeah, because Germany has a very advanced bus system, much better than almost any place I've ever been. They run all the time and go everywhere. So they just had to tell me which, you know, I'd get off a bus and then get on another bus. I think it took 2 buses to get there, and I just walked. And in Germany, you walk.
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't drive, not in 63. And so for a year, I went to church in this branch, which is, I'm sure now, a ward.
And where was this at again in Germany?
Solingen in the state of Nordrhein-Westfalen.
Do you remember the branch president or anyone there at the time?
It was a missionary.
Oh, okay.
The branch president was Vic Ludlow.
Oh,
and I have sort of kept in touch with him, not close at all. But when I got back to the U.S. after Germany, I still had to go to high school another year.
Oh, okay.
I had been in Germany during what should have been my senior year. But I signed a contract saying I would go back to Stadium High School. And I was younger than most people because California let people start first grade before you were 6.
Oh, okay.
So I was really about the same age as everybody in the senior class anyway.
So I need to pause for a second. So wasn't Stefan a brother?
Stefan
Schmid
was the son of the second family I lived with.
Oh.
I lived with 2 families.
Oh, okay.
And while I was there, my parents got a divorce.
Oh, okay.
And Mr. Schmid was so angry at me, like I had any control over it. How could you even come here and live in our house when you knew your parents were going to get divorced?
Really?
I mean, he was not a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I had to find another place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And the exchange program called up a family in the same city who had had an exchange student 5 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so I met the Schmieds. Schmed was their last name.
Okay.
And they were so nice.
So it was the Stoms that kind of kicked you out.
The Stoms were the first
The Stoms
people.
said you need to get out.
And I think I was there close to 6 months.
Okay. And then you went with the Schmieds.
And then the last 7 months I went to the Schmieds, and they were just very nice people. They had an older daughter, Ilanka, and she was the one who befriended an exchange student.
Okay.
They had an exchange student there. But they had a little boy who was 2 years old when I was there. He was kind of an oops baby. He was at least 16, 17 years younger than Ilanka. They hadn't expected him. And Mrs. Schmid took an anxiety drug while she was pregnant because she was a nervous wreck thinking about having a baby as old as she was. And the problem was that drug is called thalidomide in English. I don't remember what it was called in German. But it caused severe birth defects for thousands of babies all over Europe. They never used it in the U.S. But their son Stefan had arms that came to here and then little flipper hands. He didn't have the bottom part of the arm, and he didn't have a true wrist. He had, I think, 3 fingers and a little thumb on both arms.
I actually remember meeting him.
Yes.
I think he came to visit the U.S. when I was a little girl in Puyallup, Washington.
Yes.
I remember him coming because it was such a unique experience because I had never seen anyone with an arm like that. And didn't he work in computers or something?
Yes.
I think he did.
He was a smart guy.
Yeah.
And good at math. And because he had a disability, the country of Germany put him through any program he requested. And computers made sense because he could sit here like this. And he was very good at it. He worked for a company, an international company in Germany, and had business in the U.S. So he was actually working in Texas, but he flew up to Washington to spend a few days with us. It was really amazing.
Yes, and I was named after him, if I remember right.
You were. Stephanie is my 6th child, and I was sure that it was going to be a boy. And so Harold and I agreed to name him Stefan. But out popped a female. Okay, we can fix this. Stephanie. So you were named after Stefan Schmid.
Yep.
He was a cute little boy I used to chase all over the house. And it was nice for the parents because in Germany they don't really have babysitters. But I babysat for them so they could do things. Because they were older. They were probably in their 50s when he was 2. So they were really older to have a baby. And anyway, I loved the Schmids. They were wonderful people. And when I came home, it was hard for me to speak English. I would try and say sentences, but I'd come out with phrases in German. And my German was really good because even after living in Tacoma and going to high school there and speaking English for a year, when I went to BYU, before I registered for classes, you see, this was before you could register online. You could only do it in person in the 60s and even 70s. But anyway, I went to the German department and only spoke German and went to the head of the department and said, I'd like to major in German. What do I start with? So he put me in a 300 level grammar class, which I really needed. But before that, I got to backtrack a week. I got a job in Provo at the Language Training Mission. It was before the MTC was invented, and they had separate buildings around Provo where missionaries would only learn one language. And it turned out that the Language Training Mission was half a block from the house I lived in. But anyway, I got a job there as a listener. So I pretended to be an investigator. And they would practice the lessons in German, and I would answer and ask questions in German. So I worked there a week, then I went to the head of the German department. And he thought I was German. And the man who interviewed me at the LTM thought I was German. So I did speak it really well. And I mean, I'm 74, and I know I have an accent, but there are still a lot of things I can say, and of course I understand more than I can say. So, but going to BYU was like going to Mecca for me. I got there and I thought, oh, this is home. I loved Provo, and I loved being around people who were all LDS. It was amazing to me, and I'm forever grateful for a degree from BYU and a year of graduate school, because in Provo is where I learned how the church is supposed to be organized. I think if I'd gone to University of Washington or someplace else in Washington, I wouldn't have learned the same things. And in Provo, you have to take a religion class every semester. And those were really hard for me. I never got an A because it was all new. I had never read the Doctrine and Covenants until I took it at BYU, and I didn't know anything about church history, not anything. And it wasn't until your dad and I got married and he recognized I didn't know anything about Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthood. I had to memorize deacon, teacher, priest, and etc. in the Melchizedek priesthood, because they didn't teach that with the lessons at the time. And when we were married, our first Christmas, Harold got me the big songbook for primary, because I didn't know any primary songs. I never went to primary. And so the two of us would sing primary songs together so I could learn them.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
So I do need to end the video in a second. It's a really long video. Can you tell me when and how you met Dad?
I met him. I had been engaged to somebody when I was a senior, and it didn't end well. That broke off right before the wedding. And I had no interest in getting married. I was going to go to graduate school. I got a really big federal fellowship, which means scholarship.
Like a scholarship.
To go to graduate school, I was going to be a speech pathologist, and I had graduated in speech and language pathology. That was my bachelor's degree with a minor in psychology. And so I had this big fellowship. I moved into Deseret Towers, which was the ritziest apartment on campus because the scholarship paid for it. And I had a room all by myself, and I had a meal ticket. So I met Harold because the week before I had gone, my mother and grandmother came to my college graduation, and then I drove back to Tacoma with them. And a week before school started, there was a fireside for young adults, except they were called Men and Gleaners in the 60s. So I went to a fireside for young adults because I needed to find a ride to Provo. And there was a guy there that, Dale Cook was his name. I recognized him from having gone to state dances. And so, talking to Dale, he had a car, and he was looking for people to drive with him in his car so he wouldn't have to pay for the gas, which was not even $1 a gallon then. So I was in a car. There were 3 guys and me, and we couldn't leave until after 5 o'clock one night. I think it was a Friday, and because the guys all had jobs. And anyway, so we drove in the car together, and when it got dark, Dale said, I just can't drive anymore. Can anybody else drive for at least a while, and then you can wake one of us up and we'll drive. And Harold says, I like to drive. I'll drive if somebody will just stay awake and talk to me. I can talk. So I moved next to him in the front seat, and the 3 guys just all chummed up together and went to sleep on top of each other. And Harold and I talked all night. And I thought, what a nice guy. He's so cute. But I didn't want to get married. On the way, Harold was just going to BYU for the first time. He had gone to community college before that. And so he had to go to orientation week. In fact, I think all three guys had to be there a week before I did because they were all new at BYU. So I went up in my dorm and I had told them that BYU had dances every night during orientation week. You just show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went, and the very first night I walked in the door and got into where they were dancing, and pretty soon there was a tap on my shoulder, and there was Harold. That happened every night. And dumb as I was, I couldn't believe that he was waiting for me. He got there really early and hid in a corner and just watched the crowd until I got in, and then he'd fall in behind me. And we danced every night.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me where my classes were. I was in graduate school. All but one class was in the Fine Arts Center, which was also where all the speech and hearing classes were. And so after school started, I'd be going down the hall and there would be Harold. And he'd say, "Oh, hi, I'm on my way to class." I said, "Okay." I didn't know his classes were all the way across campus. He literally had to run to every class. So anyway, it kind of went like this, and we started dating. And I just told him, I said, "You're a lot of fun, but I have no interest in getting married." He said, "I don't either. I have too much school." I said, "Okay, let's just go have fun." So we did. And 3 months later, we got married. So.
Okay.